A common question with proximal hamstring tendinopathy is which core exercises are okay to do. In this video, we'll go over some core exercises as well as some modifications that could be used for proximal hamstring tendinopathy. Let's start off by talking about which core exercises are okay to do. And in short, there's actually not an exercise that we need to avoid when it comes to core exercises. And the reason is because a lot of core exercises are actually body weight exercises, which means that they're probably not going to put enough load on the hamstrings for them to be a concern. Now, someone might experience pain while doing some of these core exercises, but that has more to do with the sensitivity of the tendon to load than it actually has to do with the tendon structure being damaged somehow by the load. You could think of this like banging your elbow on something that you weren't expecting. Initially there's pain, but after a few minutes the pain goes away, and if we look at the elbow, there's no bruising and really no signs of tissue damage. And this is similar to if we're experiencing pain with core exercises. The pain isn't an indication that there's actually tissue damage occurring. It's more of an alarm system to kind of let us know that we're placing load on the tendon and to proceed with caution, or at least be aware of the load. And so if we need to, we can regress the core exercises so they're placing less load on the tendon and then slowly build up its tolerance to the load. And for the core exercise, we'll go over the more common core exercises plus the progression. So we'll start with lower load variations and then gradually work our way up to higher load variations with a little bit more emphasis on that proximal hamstring tendon. So that way we'll be able to pick the exercise that we feel confident in doing, and we also are able to have some challenge to the core muscles. The plank is probably the most commonly used core exercise, and so we can start by doing planks on knees. We'll start with our hands underneath our shoulders, and so we want to have our hips extended so our shoulders, hips, and knees are all in the same straight plane. And we can also progress this into planks on elbows. And so when we're in this position here, you'll notice our hip is actually going to be a little bit flexed. And this is actually a great position for those with proximal hamstring tendinopathy because it starts to load that hamstring in a little bit of hip flexion, but it doesn't put too much load, so it shouldn't be too irritating as we hold this position. And really we want to just pick the one that we're going to feel the most challenge with. So if that's up on our hands in this position, we can start here, or if we're able to tolerate it, we could do a plank in this position as well. We could progress the plank to our standard plank where we're going to be on our elbows underneath our shoulders and then up on our toes. Generally we hold these for about 10 seconds and then repeat for several repetitions, usually about 6, so the equivalent of a minute. But we're also able to hold these as long as we can so that we have a challenge on that core. There are also 2 progressions from that standard plank to further increase the load. One is being in a quadruped position. So what that means is we're going to have our hands underneath our shoulders and our knees underneath our hips. I like this progression because again it's loading the hip into a little bit more flexion, but again not placing too much load on that hip, but just gradually exposing us to more hip flexion. And so in this position here, lift the knees so they're barely off the ground, and then we can either hold this position here for time, or we can slowly do some shoulder taps. So just working to slowly tap the opposite shoulder with your hands. And the other progression is to start in this high plank position and then go into a downward dog. So again, we're loading a little bit more into that hip flexion and then coming back to that regular plank. If we want to, when we're in that downward dog, we can also extend one of our hips to further increase the challenge and then come back down and repeat on the other side. The next exercise is a side plank, and this mostly focuses on the side of the core as well as the glutes. To perform, we're going to have our elbow underneath our shoulder and our knees stacked. And then from here, we're going to lift our hips up and extend them forward. So this is in a nice straight plane. I like to think that there's a wall in front of us and that we're going to be flush against the wall. And then again, hold this position generally for at least 10 seconds, but feel free to hold as long as you feel like you're able to. We can also play with some of the position here, so we don't have to always be in this extended position, although it's probably going to get the most core activity. We can actually flex the hips a little bit and just lift up a little bit higher, so that way we're working the core in a couple of different movement planes. And then just like we did for the plank, we can increase the lever by performing these on our feet instead of on our knees, and that'll make the exercise a little bit more challenging. So again, everything else remains the same, elbow underneath shoulder. We can have our feet either separated like this, or we can have them stacked. It doesn't matter, whichever one feels more comfortable. And so again, lift the hips up and then hold this position. For some people with the side plank, they actually have a little bit of shoulder pain, and we could take our top hand and pull down on the shoulder, and sometimes that provides a little bit of support for the shoulder, so that way we can hold the plank. And then a challenging variation of that side plank is to be in this position and then slowly flex that top leg up and then back down. I like this variation because it prepares us for the single leg stance during running, so it just gives us a way to challenge the core and kind of prepare us for running. And then next we can perform the bird dog exercise, which kind of integrates everything together. And so to perform this, we'll start in a quadruped position with our wrists underneath our shoulders and our knees underneath our hips. And from this position, we're going to lift our arm up as high as we can go, and then slowly back down. Ideally, when we're doing this, all the movement comes from the shoulder and everything else remains still. So we'll switch sides, lift the right arm up as high as we can go, and then back down to that starting position, and then just slowly alternate between sides. Once we're able to do that, then we can progress to using our legs. So we're going to do the same thing, just moving our legs. And initially, I actually like to use a furniture slider, or if you're on hardwood, you can use a towel as well, because we could just slide, because sometimes the hip can get a little bit irritated with this position with proximal hamstring tendinopathy. So this is just a good way to bridge the two exercises if we need to. And so I'm going to put my foot on the slider. So back in that quadruped position, extend the hip back as far as we can go, and then bring it up as high as we feel comfortable. And then just slowly repeat this on one side. And then obviously we can repeat on that other side as well. Once we're able to tolerate that okay, then instead of using the furniture slider, we're going to lift that leg up into extension. So back into that quadruped position still, lift the leg up into extension, push the heel back like I'm trying to reach to the wall behind me, and then bring it back up. Feel free to set it back down on the ground, extend the hip, and then back. Of course, with this one, since we're not just sliding on one side, we can alternate sides as well. And once we're able to do this, then we can integrate everything together. So we could do opposite leg and opposite arm. So what that'll look like is here, left leg, right arm, and then back, and then switch, and switch as well. Sometimes there's an emphasis to try to keep that low back from extending. Personally, I don't mind it that much because it's normal biomechanics, but if you want to try to keep that low back still, that's okay as well. I don't think it really changes much with the exercise in terms of the benefit. And then finally, we could do some glute bridges, which will work the back extensors a little bit, as well as obviously the glutes. To perform, we'll be laying on our back. The closer your heels are to your glutes, the more glute activation you're gonna get. If you start bringing your heels too far away from you, then you're gonna get a little bit more hamstring, which is fine, but you're just gonna be working that hamstring a little bit more than the glutes. So with heels closer to me, I'm gonna squeeze my glutes, lift up so that I'm getting full extension through the hips, and then slowly back down. And so this is generally repeated for reps. If we feel like we're getting some pain in this movement, then we can use an exercise band and place it around our knees. And now we're gonna push out against the band so that we have a little bit of tension, and then repeat the same thing. Sometimes this helps just to activate the glutes a little bit more. It gives us a little bit of feedback as we're going through this exercise. And then if we want to further increase the load, we can obviously do single leg then. So I'm going to take the band off. And then you can either start with the leg extended or flexed, it doesn't matter. And then slowly lift hips up and then back down to the ground. Again, repeating for reps. So hopefully this video on core exercise for proximal hamstring tendinopathy was helpful. I think the big thing to take away from this video is that there's not a specific core exercise, or really any exercise for that matter, that we absolutely need to avoid. We just need to find the load that we're able to tolerate with the movements that we're able to tolerate, and then gradually build up from there.